What's up, guys? I'm the Unhinged Engineer, and if you already knew that, if you've been following this channel pretty regularly, you would know that for the last few weeks I've been working really hard at something that I've kind of alluded to, but I'm still waiting to see the results, how things turn out. So once I have more information, I'll be sure to share it with all of y'all. But in essence, it's been a large engineering effort, mainly with like relearning stuff that I learned in college way back when, and then kind of like not use as much in my day job really quickly. And so, it's made me realize, like, I'm sure there's lots of people in my position who like have stuff that they learned in school and really enjoyed, but maybe just, not everything in every job is going to be used all the time, so things get rusty. And so, kind of forcing myself to have to learn this stuff at light speed, like crash course, has made me realize that it's actually a lot more feasible than you would think. I think it was intimidating for me. I felt like an old geezer trying to like crack open old textbooks and whatnot. But it's actually not that bad if you systemize it in a particular way, which I like to think my way works. So I figured in this episode I would just share it with you, and hopefully if you've got a project that you're put on for your job, or you've got a technical interview coming up, or whatever other reason you've got to learn stuff that you have since forgotten after college, hopefully this system could help you, right? So yeah, let's get right into it, right? Essentially, I've kind of used like a DFS with backtracking approach, right? In terms of like going through different topics. So let's just use, for argument's sake, like a technical interview. And let's say this interview is for let's say control systems for a satellite, just for argument's sake. And so, you're trying to remember, this is stuff I've worked on previously, just as a hypothetical example. Let's say that, you haven't done any of this stuff in a few years, and you're trying to scramble to prepare for an interview really fast. What would you do first? What should you do first? And so my approach would be, go as deep as you possibly can to the most fundamental topic or concept. It's really a concept, right? It's more than a topic. Concept that you think is important for getting through what you're trying to work on, right? And so, like, assuming we're doing attitude control, we're not doing like orbital mechanics stuff. The main thing with this is like conservation of angular momentum, right? Like all sorts of control systems for orientation, at like pointing, they all revolve around conservation of angular momentum. Reaction wheels, magnetic torque rods, IMUs, right? Like all these things, rate gyros, all these things revolve around angular motion, conservation of angular momentum, right? Rigid body dynamics, or kinematics, excuse me. Like these are like core concepts, which usually, like if you just went through undergrad, like me, like I didn't get a PhD in any of this stuff, a professor would like hit a beat, make sure you get it, test you on it, and then move on to the next thing. What was that thing? Like that beat throughout the cadence of a class is what's really going to make or break you in this kind of situation. Or, getting back to like staying on a current job, you're put on a new project, things are spinning up really quickly. What do you do? Like in order to stay above water, to not fall behind, like these are the core beats that will ensure that like you're at the same baseline as everybody else you're working with. Because I'm sure, PhD students, even though they probably go into like so much depth that these basic concepts are drilled into their brain, they still probably forget stuff and need to scramble and relearn, right? Well, the first step I'm talking about here is like that deep dive. Like go as deep as you possibly can. Like do the math yourself. Like rederive the formulas, relearn like the core principles, right? And once you really feel like, okay, I remember this concept as well as I did the day I took an exam on it, right? Which I guarantee you, getting to that point will not take as long as you think, okay? At least it hasn't in my case, and I'm really lucky. Then you start to backtrack. And it's like, okay, what's the next logical step after doing conservation of angular momentum and like principal moments of inertia and that kind of stuff? I bet I should learn how a gyroscope works. Like, especially if you're looking at a job or a project and there's a gyroscope involved, right? So then you go read about a gyroscope. And now you kind of transition from like papers and academic journals and that kind of stuff to like YouTube videos and blogs and engineering reports and stuff, right? Now you're getting more applied. You read a bit about the gyro. You're probably going to read something and be like, oh, I don't really understand how that works. But then you're going to link it back to that core concept, right? So every time that you start to branch out from that core concept into more applied stuff, you kind of use that as your line, right? Like scuba divers, like they have that line up to air, right? And they run it all the way down so they keep air. I mean, assuming they don't have a tank, which most of them probably do. I'm not a scuba diver. You get the point, right? So yeah, start to slowly backtrack your way from super, super deep concept all the way back up to application level knowledge, right? And so for both of these, where you're, either A, being quizzed on your experience, or B, you're working on a new project that is assumed to be applied, you're kind of backtracking your way towards where you want to be, which is somebody who understands how these things are engineered in the real world, right? And so that's been my strategy for crash coursing things I learned in college really, really quickly. And I know that it's working much better this time around, because I've tried other things before and it's not gone as well, right? Like I'll give you an example. Rolling with this interview hypothetical, right? There were a series of interviews about what we're talking about, like attitude, determination, and control, that I prepared for by reading a bunch of engineering textbooks, but I would specifically go to the back and I would read the very applied, very system level chapter. Like, this is how, the space shuttle does this stuff. And I would read all about, the different tech and things that the space shuttle has. And I would basically just accumulate this. I mean, space shuttle's a bad example, it's not a satellite. But satellites, obviously, right? I would accrue all these, bits and pieces of applied knowledge, but I wasn't deep enough on that stuff to really understand, the core principles of how they work, which is what I was then asked in the interview, right? Nobody would ask me, how does Starlink do this? Nobody, that's not something that they're going to ask you. Or how does explain to me how NASA codes their GNC system. Nobody's going to ask you that, applied high-level question. They're going to ask you, what's a state machine? Or what are Euler angles? Or, explain how you take a derivative of a vector in one frame and in another one, like vector in a moving body frame and an inertial frame or something like that. They're going to ask really, really fundamental core questions. They're not going to ask you how something was done one time, right? And so, I think my logic at the time was I got to sound like I know what I'm doing. And in order to sound like I know what I'm doing, I got to know how it's done, right? But that's not really the truth. The truth is, you've got to sound like you know your shit, which is a different requirement, right? Know what you're doing means you've done this kind of thing before. But there are lots of people who have done the kinds of things they're trying to get a job for before done, right? But they fail to get the job interview, because a good interviewer is really trying to see if you know what's going on, right? Because on an engineering team, there's always some, schmuck who doesn't know what the hell's going on. They do not want to hire that person. That's the riskiest part to them. Not missing out on somebody good. It's hiring somebody bad, letting them squeak through, and then suddenly you got to pay them severance, right? So demonstrating that you know your stuff is a very different requirement from demonstrating that you know what you're doing. And in order to demonstrate that you know your stuff, you have to know your stuff. And that starts with the very, very core fundamentals. That's why we're taught these things in an order. So all I'm trying to say to you is, relearn these things in the same order that you learn them. Go really, really, really deep, really, really, really fundamental, to the point of verging on too abstract, right? And then work your way back. Work your way back using that as your visual landmark to make sure that you're on the right track, right? And so, yeah, I think this framework overall is great for relearning stuff really quickly, right? And, will you go as in-depth as you did, in college, when all you did was, these courses and stuff? Probably not. I mean, I've been working hard at this thing I'm talking about for about, 2 weeks. And so it's crazy for me to expect that I'll be just as good now as I was at the end of my orbital mechanics class, right? But I might be 60% of the way there, or 80% of the way there. And if you've ever done a technical interview before, or you've ever jumped on a project that's just spinning up, you know that like that's the important part, right? Because once you get into the nitty gritty, the extra little like 90 to 100th percentile, like I guess 0 to 10, no, 90 to 100, whatever. That stuff's all circumstantial anyway, and you're gonna have to relearn it anyway, right? So, you know, that kind of fundamental baseline that you're looking for, that level of competency that you want to demonstrate, either in an interview or at the founding of a new project, you can get that in a very short amount of time using this framework, right? Like dive all the way in, really remember what you learned, the core fundamental first principle, and then, you know, trace your steps back up to where you want to be, like hopefully working on a satellite or whatever the hell else, right? So yeah, hopefully it works out for me, and if it doesn't, I'll eat these words and probably not make a video about it because that would be embarrassing. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helped. I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I'm making professional development and technical content, kind of 50-50, for, you know, aerospace engineers, software engineers, people trying to break into like autonomy or machine learning. Basically, if you're trying to build cool tech, work at cool companies, and make lots of money, then this is the channel for you. So yeah, hopefully you can either get some good tips on how to do that or watch somebody fail. Either way, if that's something you're interested in, I really recommend you subscribe to this channel. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.